Now, one of the issues which I'm most interested in and which I think is really important to many of my constituents, but which haven't featured so far very heavily in the election campaign, is that of mental health. 1 in 4 of us will suffer from some form of mental illness at some stage in our lives. 1 in 10 school-aged children is suffering some form of mental illness, made worse by the huge pressures of social media that we're all too familiar with. 1 in 6 women will suffer from some form of perinatal mental illness, and that may have a huge impact on ability to bond and attach to new babies as well. So it's a really important area. So that's why earlier this year I set up a dedicated website called adaandworthingmentalhelp.org.uk. You can see it's online now, which gives a lot of information about where people can go for help and support, basic information about their rights under the law and what the law means for people with some form of mental illness. And that's proving to be a very useful tool for many people who may be experiencing mental illness within their family, friends, colleagues than others. So please use that website. There are organisations like the fantastic Corner House here at Southwick, which I've supported for many, many years, that can provide a real lifeline and support for people in the community with some form of mental illness, and they need that support and companionship and help that is so important to enable so many more people to be able to live normal everyday lives. So that's why I'm really pleased that this government has recognised the parity of esteem we need to have for people with a mental illness compared to physical illness. Why should we treat a mental illness any differently from somebody who has diabetes, a heart condition? Having a mental illness is having an illness. It just happens to be a mental illness. So of course we need to treat those long-term conditions seriously. We're putting a lot of extra money in particular into helping school-age children, making sure that teachers are much better trained to recognise some of the symptoms of mental illness. They can be passported on to make sure we have earlier interventions for young people in particular before those mental illnesses become much worse. There's also a really alarming correlation that if you are a 15 or 16 year old suffering some form of depression, there's something like a 99% chance that your mum was suffering from depression or mental illness during pregnancy. And that's why it's so important that we deal with mental illness early and we prevent those conditions getting worse into later life. I think mental health is really important for so many of us, and I'm glad this government is doing much more to recognise that, and there's much more that we can and we will do in the future.